Okay, everyone. Good evening and welcome. Welcome to the Open Web Application Security Project, London chapter. Thank you for taking your time to come and see us tonight. My name is Sam Stepanian. I'm your chapter leader. And this chap over here is Sharif Mansour, chapter co-leader. We run these events approximately once every 2 months. Usually they are on the last Thursday of the month. So sometimes it's not last Thursday. So please watch out for announcements because it depends on the availability of the venues. As you can see, today we are all in a nice Just Eat venue. And I hope you all managed to grab yourself some food and drink already. More about it a bit later. Other events we run is a hackathon and a capture the flag competition. We run this once a year. We ran a very successful one last year. We're planning to run one this year, probably in October or November. We'll announce the date a bit later. Another new thing we're trying to run is workshops. So we're going to launch them in August. So please follow the announcements, and I'll tell you how to follow us. So somehow you all managed to find us. I know quite a few of you are first time here. So how can you find out about the next event? So the most reliable way of finding out when the next event is on is join our mailing list. It's a very old-fashioned way of communication, and the actual web UI of Mailrun is looks horrible. It's something which was created in the 90s. However, all you need to do is just go to the URL, type your email address, click subscribe, and that's it. We promise not to spam you. It's a very low-volume mailing list. We only send announcements about the next events and some important announcements about OWASP Top 10, for example. You can also follow us on Twitter. I know quite a few people who found us on Twitter and actually managed to get a ticket through Twitter, which is very good. Again, very reliable way of following us because we don't tweet that often. We only tweet about stuff which is relevant to OWASP and application security. Those of you who are on Facebook, you can also like our page, OWASP London on Facebook. And actually, we are streaming live using Facebook. More about it later. Those of you who are developers who are just using Slack, you can also join our channel on Slack and ask me if you need an invite for Slack. I will tell you how to join it. We have a channel that is called Chapter London on the owasp.slack.com. We also have a YouTube channel. So if you want to watch the talks again, or those of you who are unable to make it and you want to watch our talks later on, you can watch us on YouTube, just youtube.com/OWASP-London. Very easy way of finding our talks. They're all recorded in wonderful 4K using a camera operated by Sharif here. And obviously, we're live streaming as well. Of course, we can also find out events from our webpage, which is owasp.org, index.php London. And I hope you visit owasp.org for other application security questions as well. So provisional date for the next event, I put it up on the screen, is going to be on the 28th of September, which is last Thursday of September. It's provisional. We'll confirm it a bit later on. So we are live streaming. We are live now. So please bear that in mind. Last time we were watched by about 3,000 visitors. We are live streaming on Facebook as well as on YouTube using the Just Eat facilities. So here's the agenda for tonight. I hope you all done a bit of networking. This is why I ask you to put the sticky label with your name, so it's easier to start talking to someone when you know their name. I hope you managed to get yourself some pizza. Those of you who were unable to get some drinks, the fridge is just over there. Because we're security guys, you need to get yourself a bottle opener, right? So it's a two-factor authentication. You get an opener, open the door, open the bottle of beer. Okay. So first item is I'm going to do another bit of update on OWASP, our projects, who we are, what we do, some new events coming up. Then we're going to have Lewis talking about security in AngularJS framework. Unfortunately, Dennis Cruz was unable to make it tonight. He had to urgently fly to Germany. And Sharif will present some slides on OWASP Summit. Then we're going to have a bit of a break, more pizza and beer. And Christian will talk to us about OWASP ModSecurity core rule set version 3.0, which came out recently. And hopefully, if the gods of live demo are going to be gentle to us, we will be able to do a bit of live demo, how to configure ModSecurity live. And we're going to do a wrap up. And then we're going to do more networking and hopefully drink more beer at the Viaduct Tavern, which is a Victorian pub on the way here. Those of you who were walking from St. Paul's tube station may have seen the Viaduct Tavern, because quite a lot of people are already there drinking. Okay, so who are we? So OWASP, first of all, is a charity. We're a global non-for-profit organization, and our goal is to improve software security. We are a vendor-neutral community. We are supported by vendors. We are sponsored by them, but all our advice we give is completely vendor-neutral. We pride ourselves because we think we have the collective wisdom of the best minds in application security worldwide. I'll tell a bit later why we think that. And what do? We collaboratively develop and provide free tools, free guidance, free standards for everybody. Okay? So all our meetings, including this one, are all free to attend, and it's free as in beer, and free beer is actually included, thanks to our sponsors. So we have now over 200 chapters all around the world. That number fluctuates because people join and people leave. In the UK, this is the list of chapters. In the UK, there's one chapter which is inactive, Royal Holloway, which we tried to restart unsuccessfully. But hey, London is not too far from Royal Holloway. Anyway, we are the biggest chapter here. Now, there are no OWASP chapters down south. So if you want to, if you're an application security professional, you want to open a chapter down south, let's say in Brighton or Southampton, please come and speak to us, because we know there are a lot of security people and tech startups down south of England. However, we have no OWASP chapters there. So it would be good to have some application security meetups there. So another important point, we are all volunteers. None of us is paid to do any of this work, any of the organization, any of the work on the projects. And our speakers are not paid to present at all. There are 45,000 of us worldwide. There is a membership. You can become an OWASP member if you want. You don't have to be a member to come here. However, we encourage you to become a member, because for individuals, it's only $50 US per year. And this $50 US is a donation. It's just it's not a membership fee per se to say, oh, yeah, I'm a member of OWASP. But that means that you're actually donating to all the good stuff that we do. And obviously, $50 US now roughly translates to about 38 British pounds due to Brexit. I think previously it was about 25 pounds. So yeah, inflation and Brexit affected us a bit. So if you do become a member, these are the benefits that you get. Of course, you need to support the ethics and principles of our foundation. However, you can underscore your awareness of application security within your organization. You can increase your value, your knowledge, expand your skills, and collaborate with like-minded professionals worldwide, collaborate on projects. Another very important thing, if you do become a member, you will get exclusive discounts on a lot of security conferences, not only in the UK, but worldwide as well. And these range from 20% to 99% discounts on a lot of conferences, which I think is very, very cool. Of course, this $50 US is a donation, so you will know that you're actually supporting your local chapter and projects that we're involved in. Another very cool thing that a lot of people don't know, and I encourage you, if you're an OWASP member already and you haven't got an OWASP.org email address, please request it, because you're entitled to it. And that means you will have another email address to talk to OWASP guys and work with project people and say, I have an OWASP.org email address. Cool. And of course, another important thing, if you're a member, you can vote, and more about voting later, because you can actually shape the direction of our community. Now, there's one extra benefit. If you're an OWASP member, you can request a sticker. We have OWASP member sticker for your laptop. I personally don't decorate my laptop with stickers, but I know a lot of people like to do that. So yeah, we have some stickers for you to collect if you are members. Now, we also have, of course, corporate sponsors. You can see the logos on the screen. There are lots of them. I'm not going to name them. I know some of you actually work for them, so you will recognize your logos. So there is a corporate membership, and it consists of different levels. These organizations on the screen are premier corporate members, so they donate $20,000 per year. And of course, we thank all of them for supporting our projects. OWASP London is supported by these organizations, as you can see, and organizations do invite us in and host us and provide some food and drink. And of course, today we are at Just Eat, with this wonderful venue, as you can see. And last event was at WorldPay. And by a complete coincidence, I can assure you, the top security guy at WorldPay, when we were there 2 months ago, is now actually here at Just Eat, and he's the Chief Information Security Officer of Just Eat. And his name is Kevin Fielder, so I'm going to ask him to welcome us and say a few words.
Thank you. Sorry, I'll keep this very quick because I'm not here to listen to. But yeah, I worked at WorldPay last month when we had OWASP in, and now my team has set up this event here this month as well. So very briefly, Just Eat, we're in 13 countries. We have something like 70,000 restaurant partners and over 80 million customers. So probably a bit bigger than people might think. In my first 3 weeks here, I can genuinely say it's probably one of the best places I've worked. The guys, everyone here is kind of really on point and really wants to do the right thing. So I've had a really good intro, really good first few weeks. So yeah, very quickly, a couple of admin things. If you haven't noticed, the toilets are that way and follow the corridor around to the right. Fire exit is also the same, around that way to the right. We have no test plan I'm aware of. So if you hear a fire alarm, leave. You'll see us, follow us, we'll be running, it's all good. So I'll keep that short, so I'll hand you over to the more interesting talks from the guys that are here this evening. Thanks, guys.
All right, cheers. Thanks, Kevin. Okay, briefly on some cool stuff that we do at OWASP. So first of all, we release a lot of guidance, and these are the most popular books that you can get. So first of all, you can get a code review guide if you want to review your code for security vulnerabilities. We also have a developer's guide, which will tell developers how to develop secure code. We have a testing guide for testers and pen testers on how to test software for security flaws. Another interesting publication is Mobile Security Testing Guide, which was recently updated. We also have a mobile application security verification standard. So if you're running mobile apps, please check it out. It will be very useful for you. And of course, very popular document that OWASP produced many years ago is called SAM, or Software Assurance Maturity Model. And if you're not using it, definitely check it out so you know that your organization is developing its software in a secure manner, and you need to find out which level you're at compared with the others. Okay, the most popular OWASP project ever, as you probably know, is called OWASP Top 10 vulnerabilities of top 10 security risks. And this year we were due to release a new version. The last version was out in 2013, and we had a release candidate in 2017. There were some changes. There was a lot of public outcry, a lot of publications. A lot of big security companies voiced their opinion, and that opinion was very, very strong. So what actually happened in June last month, we had a summit just outside of London, and we had a working group on OWASP Top 10. And the thing is, originally, OWASP Top 10 was supposed to be released now, so end of July, beginning of August. Those of you who are following OWASP website probably noticed that this has not happened. Why? Because what happened, the release candidate of OWASP Top 10 was rejected at the summit. And A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, A6, A8, A, and 9 were left untouched by a consensus view. Okay, so there's no requirement to choose 2 additional items, and they're not going to be the ones that were in the original proposal, which was insufficient attack protection and underprotected APIs, because these are the ones which caused a lot of controversy. So yeah, personally, I'm happy because yeah, we need to sort it out properly. Now, appeal for more data and opinion is open until August 25th. And if you want to raise your voice and voice your opinion, you can go to GitHub, and there is a top 10 project, and you can raise an issue and you say what should be the 2 new items in OWASP Top 10. And the new provisional date for the release is now November 2017. Another very popular project of OWASP, and it's a very cool free tool called OWASP Zap, which is a free penetration testing tool. So if your developers write web applications and you just have no clue how secure they are, right, and you don't know which vendor to speak to and to buy a expensive commercial tool, you don't have to. You can just download absolutely free OWASP Zap tool and give it the URL of your web app, and it will scan it and will tell you all the vulnerabilities that you have in your web app. And it's actively supported, and actually we need even more supporters. So I urge you to check it out. If you're Java developers, the tool is written in Java. You can contribute and you can fix it. You can write plugins. It's a very active tool. If you never used it before, please do. Another update on a project that we recently had, of course, we have hundreds of projects. We're going to be very, very brief, is OWASP Juice Shop. So Juice Shop is an intentionally vulnerable web application for security training. So it's written in JavaScript using Node.js, Express, and AngularJS. And of course, the first talk we're going to have is going to be on security of AngularJS. So there's a new version of it. It just came out. And the author and the project leader of OWASP Juice Shop, Bjorn, has released a nice book called Owning OWASP Juice Shop. So if you guys are JavaScript developers or you develop anything using Node.js, definitely check it out, because you will be surprised how many vulnerabilities you can actually have. Another brief update on OWASP. We recently had WASPy Awards. So these are awards for people who are the unsung heroes of application security. And there were 3 nominations, 3 categories in Best Community Supporters. And I'm pleased to say that Dennis Cruz, who unfortunately is not here, and one of the original OWASP London guys, has actually won it, along with Jeremy Long, who writes Dependency Checker, and Nicole Becker, the leader of OWASP New York City. The Best Mission Outreach was won by Mark Miller. Now, Mark Miller is a bit of a legend, so he's the guy who runs OWASP Podcast. So those of you who listen on your phones to some podcasts, you can download OWASP Podcast and listen to some nice interviews that Mark prepares. And Best Innovator is Seba Delia Snyder, who is also one of the original OWASP London guys. So congratulations to these guys. Now I've got a message for the ladies in the house, because we have a new initiative which will allow, first of all, to learn more about application security, participate and contribute in OWASP as members and leaders, speak at OWASP events and application security conferences, make connections with like-minded women locally and globally, and develop thought leadership, train and mentor all interested women in application security. And of course, you can grow your career. So this new initiative is called WIA, or Women in AppSec. So it's only started in May. It's live. So dear ladies, please do check it out. The leader is this nice lady in the center called Tanya Janka. She is the OWASP Ottawa chapter leader. And if you're on Twitter, check her out. Her Twitter handle is SheHacksPurple. And everything about all the Women in AppSec project can be found on her Twitter account. The next big event we're going to have is OWASP AppSec USA conference, which is going to be in sunny Florida, in Orlando, in September. So those of you who can get a business trip to Florida, yeah, I definitely encourage you to go there for 4 days of some very nice training and conference. It's our biggest conference. There are about 1,000 participants, lots of talks, lots of tracks. Definitely, if you can, go to the States. We do have the European conference as well coming up next year, which will be in Israel. Yeah, and those of you who think, well, Israel is not in Europe, yeah, everyone is asking the same question. So, but it is actually going to be in Tel Aviv next year, the European one. Yeah, it's a Eurovision thing. Yeah, Australia is not in Europe as well. Right. So Mark Miller, that I just mentioned, who runs the OWASP podcast, also runs a one-day conference called All Day DevOps. It's a 24-hour conference around the clock, lots of talks. So there are 96 sessions. It's live online, it's streamed. Okay, so it's a virtual conference. You don't have to go anywhere, just on 24th of October, right? If you forget the date, you can grab a flyer, which I've got on the freebies table there. You can just tune in and listen to lots of awesome talks on DevOps and application security. Definitely check it out. It's a very big event. Another update that we have on OWASP is we are going to be electing a new global board. Okay, and there's a timeline of what's going to happen. The candidates are going to be announced in August the 7th, and there will be some interviews, and they'll be voting. So those of you who are members of OWASP, you'll get a chance to vote for new directors. And I'm pleased to announce that my co-leader, Sharif, is actually put up his candidacy for the board of directors of OWASP. I'm very pleased about that. And yeah, so one of the things that directors, candidates do, they answer questions from the community. And there's some questions that were already asked. So, Sharif, do you want me to put up your slide, or do you want to answer these questions first? And here's a mic for you.
Yeah, I mean, the slides just answer the questions. So the first one is, what kind of a plan do you have to motivate the participation of more developers in the community? And that's a simple thing, engage them. So reach out to the developers, see what they're working on, what they're interested in, and actually tailor some of these things towards the way they work. And actually that's partially of the movement for DevSecOps, is that they're moving towards continuous delivery pipeline and move to an agile methodology, and we actually need to adapt to that as well. So that's the first thing, is just engage them and also make it fun and interesting. So last year we did a hackathon. So we thought, well, we come here, we do some talks, but how do we move the needle? How do we engage them and get them to learn more about development? So we had an event for 2 nights. One event is we just taught them about web application security issues in different languages, because there's not one size fits all for the training. And then the other evening is the hackathon. So we did a small capture the flag competition with some prizes, including a drone and a Wi-Fi kettle, which is
hackable.
Which we also had a talk on, so they can watch the talk and then hack it, basically. So that was fun. So that make it more engaging. The other thing that we would do is basically host events like that in different technology companies like Just Eat, or finance companies like JP Morgan, or media companies where investigative journalism is important, and engage those developers there, get their ideas, but also get them engaged. And also, there are a lot of really interesting talks, but you can always forget what is being said, or that one little thing that you couldn't remember. So we keep the information online, we keep it documented. So if you ever want to go back to any point in the video or any point in the slides and so on, it's all available to you. We also invest in OWASP projects. So one of them was the OWASP Summit, which we're really proud to see how well it's flourished and done. We also invest in the ZAP project. We also invested in a couple of also smaller chapters. So that's what we've been doing to just engage developers and make sure that they're getting tools that are useful and they're enjoying, and we're actually building something that they want. So that's essentially the strategy that we'd like to do.
Good. So basically, if you're elected to be a director of OWASP, a member of the board, that's something that you will try to promote globally and not just for London.
Just for London, exactly.
Excellent. Yeah. And those of you who don't know, obviously, Sharif's been leading OWASP chapter with me for the past 1.5 years. And obviously, daytime work wise, obviously, as you know, Sharif used to be an application security lead at Expedia, and currently he's at JP Morgan.
Yeah, so we've done quite a lot. So aside from leading the London chapter, we had an intern, and we basically donated to the ZAP project, and he created some community scripts. And that's something that I would encourage my peers to, is that if you have an intern, just donate them to an open source project. And also you see how well he's doing, but you also get to contribute to the community, and you also do things that you couldn't do or you didn't have the time to do. and just contributing it also makes it beneficial for everyone else. So we've done that actually outside of OWASP. I also co-wrote the CIS benchmark for Tomcat. What else? There's also, I am still a chairman of a British company and a member of the Institute of Directors. They wanted some guidance on cybersecurity, and actually that's a really good thing, because every one of us are talking about if only the board understood what we're dealing with, or if they got it, but do we have documentation or do we have guidance on that? Do we also understand how the board functions? Do we understand things like, just like we have the concept of least privileges, they have the concept of the going concern. So who understands what the going concern is? Exactly, but I'll tell you about that later on. Yeah.
Roll Holloway.
Yes, and graduated from Royal Holloway, so I have a master's in information security. I used to manage also the ISG alumni group for a little while, and we had a really good talk with Kenny Patterson, who also is the IETF lead for the TLS 1.3, and I had a nice interview with him after after a couple of incidences like Heartbleed, and then the PCI Council started talking about you have to get rid of TLS 1.2 by 2016. And then actually they managed to push that back to 2018 to give people enough chance. And because there's so many browsers using older versions, it's important to move off of before we lose millions and if not billions of dollars. So we're happy that we actually managed to provide feedback on that. That video is also available online, and the entire transcript of that talk as well is there, which is really fun.
Yeah, that's on YouTube. Yeah. You can just search YouTube for Sharif's name and Kenny Patterson, and you will find Sharif's interview there. Okay, thanks, Sharif. So if you want to vote for Sharif, you're a OWASP member. So get ready. The dates will be announced. And there are obviously lots of other candidates as well.
Yeah, it'll be October 9th to 30th, I believe.
Yeah, that's the date. Okay, and so before we move on to the first speaker, another important announcement is how do we find speakers? Well, we ask people, right? And yeah, we're going to ask all of you, if you think you are good enough to present a talk at our event, so you know someone who's going to present a talk, please get them to email us. And we usually have 3 tracks: breakers, defenders, or builders. Okay, and any talks around application security can be submitted to us, and we will schedule you in after we consider your talk. Okay, so we're going to talk about the OWASP Summit during the lightning talk. So this was a big event which has happened, which I already told you about. So more about it later. So now it's time for our speakers. So the first one is going to be Lewis. Lewis, please come and take the microphone. And I'm guessing you probably want the... brief announcement for everyone who is standing up. There are still seats out front, so please do not stand up. There's seats at the back, and there are about 10 seats out front. Please take a seat. All right. How to move it actually faces your mouth. Do you hide this where it's proper? Do you need a clicker? Yes. Yes. Cool.
So hi everyone, can everyone hear me at the back? A bit louder? Okay, so I have no... Oh.
You need to mute your mic and mute your speakers.
Oh.
Yeah, the echo.
No, it's someone else's. It's so my mic. Oh, okay. Cool. I get it. Okay. So, cool. Okay, so this talk is on AngularJS. I have no notes, so this is all going to be from my head. So if I get something wrong, I do apologize. So this talk is around kind of security. Okay. This talk is around security, but I'll just introduce who I am first. So I'm Lewis Ardern. I'm a PhD candidate at Leeds Beckett University looking at browser security, mainly around how to isolate JavaScript. I used to work at Digital, but since being acquired from Synopsys, I now work as a security consultant at Synopsys. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Lewis Ardern, and the research interests are browser security, JavaScript, HTML5, and static analysis. So this talk has a lot of content, so I'm going to just try and get through AngularJS in a nutshell very quickly and then move on to the actual good parts. So does anyone actually know, has anyone actually not built an AngularJS application or knows what it is? Okay, I know you're lying, but so AngularJS in a nutshell. So AngularJS is an open source framework. It's a JavaScript framework on the client side. It's maintained by Google. Now, there's two versions of AngularJS. There's Angular, which is the new Angular version that was released, and there's also AngularJS. So AngularJS is currently on 1.6.5, and this was the first release back in 2009, 2010. Angular 2 was released, and then they just skipped 3, and now we're on Angular 4.3.0. It's on the basis of an MVC framework, so it's model view controller. There's also the model view model, which is kind of like the view is the scope, and that's the definition of the model. But in the world of AngularJS, there's also this concept of model view whatever. So whatever it means to you. So there's also services, factories, and all these different wonderful things in AngularJS. So it doesn't really matter if it's controlled or not. It was originally developed by Misko Hevery and then open sourced and maintained by Google. And the benefits for AngularJS is that it separates HTML, CSS, and JavaScript logic. And it offers convenience of DOM manipulations because it has these directives such as like on-click events, so like ng-click and so on. And it's also quite fast. It's quite fast. It's a single-page application. It's generally used for single-page applications, so you get a fluid experience through like deep embedded links by clicking through it without actually seeing the page change in many different ways. And we briefly talked about the OWASP top 10 in Sam's talk. But when you think about AngularJS, when it comes to OWASP, you generally wouldn't think it's about injection because this is more about SQL injection or command injection or XML injection. However, AngularJS has expressions on the client side, and these are generally defined by the scope object. And if you can inject, client-side code, you can actually interact with these scope objects, which might perform client-side interactions to the server. So it's kind of like an injection. Broken authentication and session management is a truly server-side implementation. It's always going to be on the server side, so it's not applicable to AngularJS. Cross-site scripting, of course, because that's what it is. It's JavaScript, and that's generally the ability to inject and manipulate JavaScript code. Indirect object resource, again, references. That's again more of a server-side issue because you're trying to access objects that you're not intended to access, and that's always a server-side implementation. Now, security misconfiguration is definitely a problem because Angular has the ability to configure things, and you can do client-side routing wrong. You can also turn off security features, so it's definitely a problem. Also, sensitive data exposure. Again, I would say this is definitely a problem. So, for example, there's also this idea when you start to build client-side applications that there's this implicit client-side trust. So, essentially, you might think that you're returning the user object just to contain the name. But if you start building things like using MongoDB with Express, you find out quite quickly that sometimes the entire user object gets returned and it gets stored in local storage. So it's definitely a problem. There's also sensitive data exposure, which I just mentioned. But when I talk about missing functional level access control, this is a server-side problem. But with AngularJS, there's actually ng-show and ng-hide that you're using to kind of show and hide the application. Of course, this is a client-side problem, but again, with the client-side trust part where people tend to start to move to the client of security, it becomes quite a huge problem. So it's kind of an issue. And again, CServe, this is more of a server-side interaction, but it's still an issue. But AngularJS actually offers some some kind of help when it comes to that problem. Unknown components with known vulnerabilities. There's my internet is unstable supposedly, but there are unknown components with known vulnerabilities. Again, this is true because we have third-party libraries that we integrate, and if they have contained vulnerabilities, that's true. And also, unvalidated redirects and forwards is also a problem because there's a dollar location service in AngularJS, which allows you to manipulate the client side and use the location.href to modify where you want to go. So now we're going to talk around AngularJS security protections. So AngularJS is quite good when it comes to actually offering security out of the box. It offers output encoding by default. So if you think of expressions with curly braces, or ngbind, it automatically outputs encode that data. So if you try to include like a on-mouse over event, as you can see on the slide, it's not going to work because it's automatically output encoded. It also offers HTML sanitization. Now, in the early versions of AngularJS, before strict contextual escaping was introduced, there was this ngbind HTML unsafe directive, and this allowed you to explicitly whitelist data. And before that, it would automatically sanitize the data. So that was the only way to explicitly trust data in an AngularJS way. But then once 1.2 came along, there was the strict contextual escaping, which basically does HTML sanitization, and it's contextually aware. So you can define it for HTML, CSS, URL, and so on. But when we think about ngbind HTML, and this is when you display HTML to the view, this only works with SE trust as HTML. But developers tend to use directives, or create their custom directives, and then they use the SE trust as CSS, URL, and so on in their own way, which can also introduce vulnerabilities. So in the configuration, there's this thing called the SC provider. And if you ever see this turned off, it's a huge red flag, and you should definitely be reporting this to your team, creating a Jira ticket because it shouldn't be there. Because once you then add things to ngbind HTML, it automatically will display the HTML markup as it is with no sanitization. Again, there's also a SE trust as, but they're generally used for custom directives. So when we think about AngularJS as well, there's also protections for the content security policy. Now, the CSP is this server-side header, sorry, it's HTTP header or response header that defines, what resources are allowed to be loaded on your page. And AngularJS by default harmonizes with CSP. It doesn't use eval by default. It doesn't use inline scripts. When you use CSP, these are automatically blocked. But CSP is configurable, and so is AngularJS with CSP. So Angular, as we said before, separates HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which means there's no inline scripts, which means it's actually fine by default. You can use it out of the box. Shouldn't give you too much of a problem, but from what I've heard from a lot of developers, it's quite still a massive pain. There are a few caveats. So when AngularJS first wants to parse expressions, it calls a new function, which is a dynamic execution of JavaScript, and this will be blocked. But it does have a workaround, and it will automatically try and process it in a different way, but it will lower the actual performance by about 30% when you process expressions. And Angular also tries to use inline styles, but not inline scripts for ngcloak and ngHide. So this is also a problem, and you would have to allow an actual bad directive within CSP to allow it to execute. So as you can see here on the page, this is generally what it would look like. So when you want to bind Angular to a page, you would define it on either the body or a paragraph tag or something like that, and you would define it with ngapp. But then if you want to include CSP, you would use ngapp with ngCSP. And then if you actually wanted to not allow unsafe eval, but allow inline styles, you would allow no safe inline. And again, if you wanted to allow no inline, but allow eval, then you would do it separately. However, when you think about allowing styles in your application, there is a wonderful paper by Mario Hedrich that actually defines that, which you can't really see the link from here because it's a bit broken, but that's fine. You can see it on the screen on the recording, and the slides will be online afterwards. It's actually about scriptless attacks. So with doing JavaScript execution through CSS, generally through things like background URL, which only really worked in Internet Explorer, but you technically can bring back IE9 from the dead, so it's still a problem. If you use a meta tag and add the compatibility mode. So instead of allowing unsafe inline, or they could have used csconf, which allows you to generate CSS with JavaScript, you can just include a CSS file into your page from the AngularJS website, and then you actually don't have to include the bad directives from CSP. But there is no silver bullet when it comes to security, and it also is the same when it comes to the content security policy. There are numerous bypasses. So if we take a look at this example, assume that we've got an application with ng-app and ng-CSP. If someone is able to inject arbitrary HTML into the page, they then can actually abuse Angular's features to execute JavaScript. Now, I'm pretty sure there's easier ways if you can inject this much HTML onto the page to find cross-site scripting, even with CSP. But it actually abuses the Angular features, especially if it uses like strict dynamic or explicitly whitelists the CSP in the script source. And there's a wonderful example, like tons of bypasses by Sebastian Likaz, who works at Google, and it's a ton of different things. It's not just for AngularJS; it's for Vanilla.js. It's also browser-specific ones, along with things like Polymer and Ember, for example. So there was also this thing called the Angular sandbox, and it technically wasn't really a sandbox, but all versions, well, not all of them, after 1.x, can't remember the version off the top of my head, there was a sandbox that essentially, the reason why the AngularJS team did this was to move you away from the DOM, because it's a complex mess. They wanted to allow you to use your own directives and then build custom directives on top of that. So they just moved you away from the DOM, and you would generally be accessing things through scope objects, which is how you represent things to the view. However, there was a team of researchers. The first sandbox bypass was found by Mario Hedrich, where you were able to essentially create two curly braces and add the constructor and add its function constructor, and you had full access to execute any arbitrary JavaScript that you wanted. But then they fixed it, and then they got a bit more complex. So what does it mean to escape the sandbox? It means to directly manipulate the document object model and just to execute plain arbitrary JavaScript. And the example here is you're creating like a constructor with a prototype. You're essentially overriding char-at, which AngularJS uses internally to process, to see if things are bad or they shouldn't actually be there, to do the type checking. And then it basically joined everything together. It used an Angular feature, which is called $eval, that I'll talk about later. And then you could execute the arbitrary JavaScript again. And there's a great blog by Gareth Hayes that essentially discusses all of this in very much detail. And as I said before, the true problem was, it wasn't that the sandbox existed. It was about that developers were introducing vulnerabilities where you were able to inject arbitrary expressions into the page, which shouldn't have happened in the first place. So Synopsys also have a great blog on this as well. It was written by David Johansson. It's a very good blog. I wrote like 2 things and I got credit for it. So anyway, there's also a wonderful playlist by Live Overflow, and it goes through different kinds of, it first explains the AngularJS framework. It goes into detail about different kinds of sandbox escapes and how it all works with like debugging. It's a phenomenal resource if you do want to check out how this works under the hood. There's also cross-site request forgery protection. So it offers help. So if you think that you've just set up your server-side implementation and you want to make sure that it's being sent as a header, because this does prevent a lot of CSRF attacks, because they'll first have to exploit grab the CSRF token and append it into the header, and it might be blocked in many ways. So Angular automatically appends it when it sees the XSRF token. So what a developer would need to do is to securely generate this token, on the server side, append it to the XSRF token as a cookie. And of course, you can't include HTTP only. So if developers start to get this in the pen test reports, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It is an issue, but it's not. So anyway, so then you want to verify, and Angular automatically converts this into the XSRF token, and it matches the token with the cookie value. And then obviously, if the server's happy with this, it will go, yep, great, and perform the request. Otherwise, it will reject it. And it's also configurable. So in the configuration of AngularJS, so if you do that angular.config, you can define the HTTP XSRF header name. So even if your current middleware supports a different name, you can configure it for whatever you want. Oh, someone's hacked me, it seems. Okay. Oh, it's auto trying to connect to Zoom now. Yeah, I think I might have lost connection. Someone made. Sorry? Yeah, that's true. I'll try and reconnect. So I've been de-auth and it wants me to re-add the token. Yeah, well, it wants me to reconnect and I don't trust any of you guys at the back. So I will set up my own hotspot and we'll go from there. No, it's trying to ask me for the password, so I'll just set up my own VPN. Huh? That's fine. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Let's connect. So no, I'm connected to my phone now. It's fine. But now I've lost. I have internet now, so that's good. I'll try and reconnect to the thing during the meeting. Do you have the link? Yes. Technical issues, guys. It's okay. You might want to get a beer, while we're waiting. But
Happy? Just need just need the meeting ID, right? Yeah. 963-232-582.
I shouldn't have told him to get a beer. Yeah, so you might need to give me. Oh, it's working now. Oh. I don't trust these guys. Yes, that's me. Yeah. Oh, that's rejoining. That's where. Okay. So guys, it's back up. So we might want to go back on with the presentation. No, it's fine. Okay, so we're going to get back to it, guys. Okay. Okay, we're good to go. So if you want to sit back down, well, it's fine. So I'll carry on. So we first talked about what AngularJS offers as security protections, and it's quite fantastic in many ways because it offers automatic HTML sanitization and output encoding. That's pretty badass. So now I'm going to move on to the AngularJS security issues, so actual implementation issues that developers will tend to be using. So when you want to load templates in AngularJS, by default, it has some quite same defaults. It just allows it to load from the current origin along with the correct protocol. But when you think of template URLs, they're generally used for routing, directives, things like ngSource and ngInclude when you want to include some third-party data or different pages into your application. So as I said before, it offers default resources are restricted from the same domain and protocol. But if you want to load third-party applications, you have to modify the configuration file. And this can be done insecurely. And you can do this by whitelisting or blacklisting URLs, depending on if you want to allow or deny certain either URLs, directories, and so on in your application. So to allow the problem of developers to actually load external resources, you can modify the configuration file and use the SC delegate provider. And this allows you to define resource URL whitelists. As you can see here, this is quite a verbose, insecure wildcard that would allow resources being loaded from any domain. Now, you definitely don't want to do this, because if someone has the ability to define what's being loaded, then they might be able to trick someone to load external resources into the page. And if you're using things like ng source or ng include, if you try and do script alert 1 in there, it's not going to work. So you'd have to write AngularJS expressions in those HTML files. And then the second one, if you take a look at it again, it's loading a very insecure scheme. So the HTTP protocol, it's allowing any subdomain from example.com, and it's allowing any directory. So again, that's very bad, and you definitely shouldn't be doing it. But the actual way to do this securely would be to, one, configure the specific protocol and domains or subdomains that you trust. You definitely don't want to allow JavaScript URIs. So never use a double asterisk to allow arbitrary domains or protocols, because it's going to, any kind of vulnerability that exists on any of those subdomains might be able to be used in your application. And if you think of like CSP, if you allow a very verbose CSP policy from a CDN, there's loads of things on that CDN that could use to compromise you. And you should never use the double asterisk as part of the domain or protocol, because again, you can allow things like JavaScript URIs, which you definitely don't want to do. And it can be any URL that is specified if it's controllable by the user. And if you think of a blacklist, it basically is the last step of the puzzle. So if you realize that, for example, your AngularJS application is relatively secure, but someone's reported an open redirect in one of your directories with and you can include a query parameter, you actually can use the blacklist in the SE delegate provider to define that you don't want it to go to that individual resource. So there's also open redirect. So as I mentioned before, there's a dollar window. The dollar window has the ability to access the location, which means you can define the href of where you want to go. So it allows developers to read and write the current browser's location, and also exposes the API. So the location API is a raw object that can be modified directly. And of course, an attacker can abuse this by adding the JavaScript URI, or just telling you to go to a very vulnerable third-party attacker.com or evil.com. And the way you would actually fix this, so instead of allowing just anyone to define the URL, you would either just do a hard-coded URL. That sounds pretty good. Or you can add a whitelist of accepted URLs. Or my personal favorite, use indirect reference maps. So just define, you want to go to welcome, you want to go to home, and that's all you can really do. And of course, if it's not inside the dictionary, just reject it. And if absolute URLs do need to be defined, because it's a requirement in your specs, you can just make sure you do like a pattern to validate the scheme. So I'm going to try and do a live demo, and hopefully I don't get kicked off again. And luckily with AngularJS, it's all local, so that's pretty fun. Okay, so if you take a look at the current application that I have, you've got a go-to parameter that's including example.com. And if I try and log in as anyone, it's going to just return back. So think of it as a Node.js on the back end. All it's doing is sending the server, sending a response. And on a returned response, it then goes away. So as you can see, we've got the open redirect. And of course, you can also do JavaScript URIs. So, oh, yeah, you got to log in. So test and test. And again, you've got your cross-site scripting. So the way to remediate this, and I'm going to try and show you some code. So like using an indirect map. So again, I define that even though we used example.com as the example, it's not a good representation. But if I want to define welcome.html and example.com, I can create a dictionary, and then I can basically do. And I'll first show you the code. So what it's doing is it's going to the location service and it's searching for goto. And as you saw here, that's what we're using as the parameter. And then if there's no redirect URL, it just defines a welcome.html. And then later in the code, we're doing a $HTTP, which sends a request to the server. And on the response through .then, we're defining the window location as the redirect URL, essentially. So what we can then do is allow the dictionary. So if we save this and try and do JavaScript alert 1, it's not going to work anymore because it's not valid. It just goes to the welcome.html. But if I want to go to example.com, I can define the map here and then just do test and then log in, and I still go to example.com. So that's the one way to remediate it. But there's obviously, as I said, a few more examples. There's also expression injection. So I mentioned earlier that even though we have things like SQL injection, XML, they're generally more damaging, there's also expression injection. And this generally happens because developers are porting AngularJS over to from inside JSP code, for example, and they're still doing interpolation on the page. So when you think about AngularJS, it's a client-side framework, and the pages should be static and for most of the time if you can. So if you mix client and server-side templates, if you think about server-side templates in general, they try to do output encoding. But Angular expressions are not are not HTML special characters, therefore they don't abide by the encoding. So if you have the ability to inject user input into the page, it's only going to escape the greater than, less than, quote, double quote. So it won't escape the Angular code. It will then be rendered into the the view engine, and Angular will process that. So where possible, avoid using client-side and server-side templates. Keep the application logic and server logic completely separate if you can. So I'm going to show you an example of what it would kind of look like from an attack perspective. And if you have Burp Suite, it automatically looks for this now, so you'll probably get a nice bounty if you find it. So think about we're sending, curly brace 2+1 into, the server's going to look at that and go, it's fine. The rendering engine's not going to encode it because it's not HTML special characters. And then it gets, only HTML special characters are encoded, and then it gets added to the Angular page. It's going to get returned back and then processed by Angular later. And then it gets sent over, as I said, like AngularJS expressions are written to the page. And I'm going to send it over to the templating engine, and Angular is going to go through and pass it all, go, yep, oh, there's an expression I need to process. And then it goes to the view, and then the mission is, 1 + 2 will convert into 2, because that's what expressions are done in AngularJS. So the way to remediate this is to, where possible, it's not always possible, is to rewrite Angular templates to be purely only AngularJS. And if you really need to, get data displayed to the view, just assign it to a scope object and display it through ngbind HTML, or through an expression, but not, as user input. You also then want to try and reduce the scope of Angular. So if you do ngapp on your full HTML body, then that's entirely Angularfied. So if you can define it only for the parts you need, so including it on a parameter or a divider, as we see in the example, then only that divider is Angularfied. So if you did have an expression going in it later, and it was encoding everything, HTML special characters, it'd be fine. But if you realize that your team says we're not going to do this, you can just use the ng non-bindable directive. And what this tells Angular, it tells Angular not to process it as an Angular expression. And of course, if you can, you can sanitize your untrusted input to remove curly braces or whatever you define in the configuration setting. They generally tell you to use escaping on the Angular documentation, so that's also another way. And of course, if an attacker has the ability to inject HTML markup, everything that I just said is null and void. So just keep that in mind. So I've got a video recorded because I don't trust myself doing this one. So this is an application. It's not using a server-side template. It's using jQuery. It's using .text that is meant to be treating it as text, but we'll see the vulnerability soon. So I'm going to log in as Bob and obviously try the password as password. That's a vulnerability that's showing the password. So I tried to log in as Bob and it failed. I'm going to try script alert 1. And again, it's not going to work. It will just treat it as text. Now, if I do try and do 1 + 1, it's then going to treat it as an Angular expression and process that into 2, as we can see here. So now we know that we're using like the latest version, so 1.6, and there's no sandbox, so there's no sandbox escape required. So we're just going to do constructor, call its function constructor, and then make an alert box pop up. So as you can see, success. Now, we're going to go away and remediate this using one of the things I spoke about earlier. So we're going to take a look at the code, and as you can see, it's bound with Angular, so it's Angularfied on the body. We're using the parameter tag with the ID of message, and we're using jQuery to update that when we get the response from the server. So as you can see here, so if the parameter user exists, it goes, if it failed to authenticate, then it's going to just return that back in jQuery .text. Now, the way to fix this is, of course, it's being assigned to the message ID, the parameter. So we're just going to include ng non-bindable for this. So now, I think something that was vulnerable is no longer going to be vulnerable because we've defined it as Angular will no longer process this. So we tried the payload again. It's just going to treat it as text. So that's one way to do it. All right. Okay, so that's expression injection. And now we move on to the more fun things, which generally people don't think about, is, Angular expressions are, snippets of code, and they can be executed through various methods of Angular. So you can evaluate, expressions with AngularJS using $eval, for example. You can order this data through expressions as well. So if you want to order a list, you can do that through Angular. And AngularJS can also parse expressions, and I'll go more into that soon. So we have something called the scope, and as I mentioned before, this is how you define data to the view. So on scope methods, you have eval, and in Douglas Crawford's JavaScript, the good parts, he mentions how eval is evil, and it's no different in AngularJS. So if you can include arbitrary user input into the expression, as defined in red, you have full access to execute arbitrary JavaScript, even if there was in this 1.5.9, which is technically meant to be the most secure because the sandbox is ridiculous. It was actually pretty secure, but I think it was Matthias Carlson who broke it, but that might be wrong. Then, of course, there's $apply, which basically is used to define. So if it's outside the Angular scope, you normally use apply to bring it back to a full cycle. And of course, you want to watch collections for when things change. There's also order by. So this is how you order things within inside Angular. So you can either do it by just defining a pipe onside the actual expression itself, or you can use the $filter with order by, or you can actually just define it inside the function itself. And of course, there's internal services, and these aren't generally exposed to developers, but you can use them if you need to, where you can use mostly everything on, as we see, I was going to do the little thing, but everything on the scope method at some points calls parse. So that's the reason why it's vulnerable. Nice. Anyway, pew. So, so there's a fantastic blog by Gareth Hayes that talks about DOM-based AngularJS sandbox escapes, and he's going to be speaking about it soon. But essentially, when you're inside order by, you're not inside a scope object. And if I have my notes, I can explain you the full reason why, but I'm not going to do it. But read his blog; it's phenomenal. So essentially, it's not inside a scope object, and a lot of the later sandboxes required the ability to call $eval, which is an Angular feature inside the scope. So he had to find a unique way of bypassing the sandbox, and it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. So the way to remediate this, if possible, avoid using user input to create expressions. And if user input does need to be used in expressions, only treat it as data rather than the code itself. So as you can see in this example, we're calling scope $eval async, and we're saying $.result equals to hello, which is a string, along with scope.user input with another string. So that's then treated as data rather than code, and it won't execute the expression as such. And then, of course, if you need to evaluate it as part of expression code, you must do strict input validation. So you would call something like make sure the scope friends is not undefined, and then you would call the own property and just check to see if it exists inside your defined list. So I'm going to show you another example, which is the vulnerable first. So what we're doing here is that we're calling an order by filter, and essentially we're defining it from user data. So when this user data comes in, it then basically calls as you can see in the ng repeat here, we've got friends and friends, and it's taking it from the user data. So now if we go to the example, I've already populated this. So there's one thing to note. So Burp Suite, for example, will find client-side, server-side template injection, but it won't find this because I'm not using curly braces. All I'm doing, I'm already inside a scope object, so it's all on the client. And so if I populate it with constructor and alert, and then short the table, and it's going to pop up a few times. So it's going through the list one by one by one by one. So so it's definitely one way to do it. Now, if we take a look at the actual fix, of course, all I'm doing here is, where is that? So I'm basically just grabbing, is it of age, phone number, or name, and then doing an index of making sure it's there, and then it will assign it to the user data. Oh, that's broken that. So if I now go to the secure example and try and do the exact same payload and sort the table, it's not going to work because it's not inside the list. Okay. So I know I might be going over time, but there's also Angular element. So Angular element is a subset of jQuery, and it allows you to still access some of jQuery's features. So if user input is indirectly added to, after append and so on, you can execute arbitrary JavaScript. So as a developer, you really need to validate the input before sending it to any of these functions, and you can do it with internal Angular features through get trusted HTML or $sanitize. Oh, that did not go the way I wanted it to. Okay. So if we take a look at this current example, we're reading data from the user, and it's sending, ng model is the way to do two-way data binding in AngularJS. So we're sending that as an after submit function, and then later we're then appending the scope after data, which is the two-way data bind, into element after, and you essentially would get your cross-site scripting. And why is there an injection? Because it's not doing strict intentional escaping, it's treating it as arbitrary HTML or markup. Now moving on to third-party library security issues. So as developers, we want to really enhance our applications, and one way to do that is including third-party libraries. But there's always a risk using third-party code, and AngularJS libraries are no different. They're using JavaScript. It's a weird and wonderful, quirky language with lots of different pitfalls and sources and sinks. So when you're incorporating these libraries into your application, you should review the GitHub issue list to see if there's any reported cross-site scripting or security issues. Use open source frameworks such as ESLint with the ScanJS rules plugin. Try and identify components with known vulnerabilities using retire.js or SNCC, because they have command line tools, you can run them. And they also have now browser implementations, and one's a burp sweep plugin and zap plugin and so on. And of course, you can use glue closure detect that looks for DOM-based cross-site scripting, and you can also manually review the code. It's very time-consuming, especially when it's not your code that you've written. So this is a third-party library. So Angular Translate is offering internationalization, and by default, it offers no translation strategy. And when there's a translation strategy, it essentially isn't doing any kind of escaping or encoding or so on. So if you can find an application that isn't applying a strategy, it will automatically be vulnerable. So as you can see here, we're including arbitrary JavaScript into the expression, and it's being processed by Angular Translate and then actually executing the JavaScript. There's also text Angular. So text Angular is what you see as what you get editor. It allows for rich HTML markup, but text Angular uses its own sanitizer. So it uses the text Angular sanitize module, and all it's doing is verifying that it's either HTTP, and that the string is then encoded on the server, but when it's returned back to the view, it's unencoded and treated as arbitrary JavaScript. Sorry, HTML, whatever. So if you take a look at the sample payload, you just include HTTP, AA, and then your alert and your payloads. You can then enter it, and it will be rendered as this. And then, of course, when that's rendered back to the view, you have your cross-site scripting again. There's also XSS and type A head, and this has two problems. So in the early versions, it was using ng bind HTML unsafe. As I mentioned before, this is deprecated now, but they were still using it, and that was automatically trusting HTML. But then if you don't include the ng sanitize module as well, it automatically will still not be escaping the code. So if you take a look at this example, all we're doing is in the type A head, we're doing an iterative list around searches and assigning it in the search value. And of course, if you can include user input in here, it's vulnerable to cross-site scripting. So I look to the future. So we have 2 and 4 now. And of course, it's very difficult to write complex but secure applications. It's always going to get, vulnerabilities get introduced. I write terrible code all the time and people slap me. So, Angular 1 contained many vulnerable features and it introduced a lot of security problems. But the Angular 2 attack surface is quite a lot smaller and quite significantly different. So they rewrote the entire framework. It's no longer doing unidirectional data binding rather than going to the scope, going to the root scope, heading over to the controller and being processed. It's now unidirectional, directly to the elements. So it has interpolation, one-way and two-way data binding, and event binding, which means when they rewrote the entire framework, they got rid of all the watchers, apply, compile, interpolate, and so on. And some of the vulnerable features weren't even introduced. They were saying this caused security problems, problematic issues, so we got rid of it. So there's no more order by pipe. And with ECMAScript 6, you don't even need $eval because you can just use template strings. So again, it has encoding and sanitization by default. It harmonizes with the CSP, and it even has better naming conventions. So, bypass security, trust HTML, and no one wants to put that in their code. If you take a look at the Facebook React code, it literally says you will be fired. So there's some really weird things in the React code. And there's also build time security. So it does ahead of time compilation rather than just in time. So you're building, you're compiling your static pages before it even goes to the page, and that it should reduce the actual attack surface of expression injection because it still exists in Angular 2 and 4. So it's important to know it is a client-side framework. The production flag can be disabled, which there's plugins in your browser, or not plugins, extensions in your browser that allow you to modify scope objects, and so there's Batarang and augury. This gets enabled in the JavaScript, and then you can't use these anymore. But then I can just capture the response and just remove it. So it's not it's a security protection, but it's not. Client elements can be modified. So if you have ng-show and ng-hide or route guards, which are Boolean, you can just satisfy their needs, and then you can get access to potential things that you shouldn't be able to see. Sensitive data can be retrieved from local storage and session storage. So don't store as much information, as little as possible, and where possible use session storage because it gets removed. Local storage is persistent. And security should always be enforced on the server. So even though we're saying it offers all these protections, you should still be doing access control, authentication, authorization, input validation, escaping encoding and sanitization, because it's going to get rid of the other issues on the server, like SQL injection. And it's also important to note that access can still occur through explicitly trusted user data, treat it as expressions. There's also expression injection, and there's third-party libraries, as we saw earlier. So even though Angular element is there, no one uses it. Everyone still uses jQuery. Well, some people do, but most people still use jQuery. And of course, there's still server-side interaction. So HTML entities will encode HTML special characters, but as we saw, Angular expressions are not HTML special characters. So in conclusion, Angular, my personal opinion, is a fantastic framework. It offers a lot of security protections by default. So don't mix server-side and client-side templates. Do not directly use user input in expressions. Check plugins for security issues using retire.js or SNCC, or using what tools you have available. So there's also scan.js, which it's a bit deprecated, but you can use the ESLint plugin. It's a bit deprecated, but I still use it. And embrace the migration from 1 to 4 because it's a lot more secure. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. Thanks very much, Luis. You might be wondering, why am I speaking into this cube thing? Because this is actually a very cool mic, right? So the idea is you throw it to a person who raises the hand, and then you speak into this little cross here, and everyone can hear you. Okay, questions? No one wants to speak into this thing? God, I think Christian did. Did you have a comment? Question? Yeah.
Wow. I got the impression that a lot of solutions to the security problems inherent in Angular is a type of whitelisting. Is that a good impression?
I would guess so, because it's on the client, so there's only so much you can do. You can use sanitization, but it offers it by default. But then if you had to explicitly trust data, you can still do sanitization. So you could use DOM Purify, for example. But if you want to make sure it's checking for age and stuff, you can still just do a valid, a whitelist approach, which I think is it's okay, but there's obviously limitations with that as well.
Yeah, it seems a bit resource intensive.
Yeah, I'm personally not a developer, so all the things the proof of concepts I make are from a security perspective. I'm not always looking at performance, which is shame on me. I should be doing better.
Okay, any more questions? Raise your hand, and I'll give you this cool mic. Yep.
Supposed to throw it.
Yeah, I'm supposed to throw it, but a bit scared to break it. What the question? Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering if you'd got any thoughts around the comparison between Angular and React from a security point. In particular, if you are running a 1.x, is it even worth bothering doing the migration to later versions of Angular, or do you just jump ship and fly React land?
So the guy sitting in front of you is more of the React expert than me, so you might want to tap him on the shoulder later. But from my point of view, I don't think it really matters, but it depends from a business perspective. From hireability, are more people using React or more people using Angular 2? So if you're going to spend migration you know, you want to look at it from one. You have to hire developers to be able to do it. But personally, for me, I like Angular 2. I think it offers a lot. React the attack surface is quite small. You know, you've got dangerous HTML. You can still technically do CSS injection, but yeah, personally, I'd still stick to Angular because I've spent so much time looking at it. But again, I think most security-esque people are saying go use React. So,
yeah.
So the guys at Riot are like absolutely advocating. So Riot Games, I think like David Rook and his team are like absolutely advocating going for React rather than Angular.
Yes, just wondering. We had a new guy join the team recently, so I've been pen testing for about a decade. Back in the day when XSS was, you know, like no mitigations and stuff like that. New guy joins the team this week, trying to explain to him why XSS is bad, and you know it's getting filtered out by the browser and all this kind of stuff. And I was just wondering, what's your view, what's the industry view at the moment on the real risk of cross-site scripting, and how do we explain it to clients in terms of, you know, how bad is this? Because I assume for most examples, switched off the mitigations in the browser to execute. So what are we saying these days to clients as to how bad XSS is and why? What's the scenarios that people can get exploited in?
God, okay.
That's to ask the topic then.
No, it's not too outside the topic. So I mean, it depends on the context. So if you have things like, you know, email encryption that's going browser to browser, the server side has no information about that anymore. It's all being re-rendered in the view. So that's quite, you know, quite a big attack surface for cross-site scripting, because if you can access the secret token or something like that, that's quite bad. Now, I truly believe that the browser will be the new operating system, because it's so many APIs are like coming into it, and you know mostly everything happens in the browser. Of course, there's now native applications, but you know, of course, you know, once you have access to either local storage, you know, a cookie which hasn't got protect flags on it, like with client-side frameworks now, you're disabling HTTP only because the framework needs access to certain cookies. People write, you know, JDKs to use authorization headers and authorization appends through JavaScript. So, you know, the attack surface is getting bigger. There's obviously definitely room for improvement, and there's definitely, you know, limitations with, you know, what people like developers are doing. But you know, there's tons of things, and I think like CSP is very complex. Now, to mitigate a lot of cross-site scripting, you would want to do CSP, but it wasn't built for developers. It was built for people who were just defining rules, and you know, that's something that we need to tackle.
Sure.
So I don't know if that answered the question.
If someone exploits it, it's still really damaging. It's still got a huge future to have big impact.
Yeah, because
what's the scenario?
I mean, so the scenario is like, you know, you can do XHR requests through JavaScript, and then you can append, you know, you can still perform requests on behalf of the user. You know, you can do pay if it's a stored cross-site scripting. It affects a lot of users. And you know, for example, you know, you can do, you know, overwrite the page to put whatever you want. You can redirect them to anywhere you want. You know, it's you know, cross-site scripting is still quite damaging in many ways.
Luis, can I also comment on that? So the best way to explain to developers is actually to show them, right? So there are two projects that OWASP has. That's WebGoat and Security Shepherd, which are training platforms which are for free for developers. They actually have very good examples of cross-site scripting, and I think developers will understand it from there. There is another free module called Beef as in beef, available in Kali Linux. It actually has some very scary examples of cross-site scripting and demonstrates how things like keyloggers or a complete takeover of browser can happen through cross-site scripting. So if you demonstrate that to your developers during your training sessions, I think they will appreciate the seriousness of that vulnerability. Yeah. So obviously this is all will be available. We'll explain to them. So obviously the key is training, and we do have some free training platforms to explore. Right. I have another question here.
Hi, Luis. I'm Raul Rodriguez from Sulke Engineering. I'm completely new to Angular. I just started getting started like 2 days ago. And I was just wondering, what sort of process do you follow to discover this type of vulnerabilities?
So generally start at the security page, but the problem when I first started to look into Angular, the security page was blank. There was literally nothing there. So I guess like taking a look at the internals and actually starting to look at the security protections it offers, start there and then see if there's any problematic areas with that. And then of course configuration is generally the most prevalent area which we find where things are misconfigured. That's an area for concern. And of course when it comes to JavaScript, adding things into sync. So you have sources where, like request parameter in Java, for example, or the query parameter or something that can be defined by the user, that's a source. And then like in vanilla JavaScript, there's syncs, in a HTML, anything in a new function, anything being called by eval. Like these are all areas for concern, and these are things you should start looking at to make sure they're not included in your application. And like even things like analytics software, generally they just take all this data and then they just throw a big eval and then send it off to a server. And I've seen quite a few clients that have been, cross-site scripting due to third-party inclusion of JavaScript.
Nice, thank you.
Okay, I think we're short of time, so thank you very much, Lewis. If you got any more questions, you can approach Lewis during the break or after the event. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, we're going to have a very quick 5-minute lightning talk. We're going to shorten it very because we're short of time. And we're only going to show you one video and show you a URL, really. And then after that, we'll have a break when we can have more beer and more pizza, hopefully. Okay, so. There will be video.
Okay, everyone. I promise this is going to be a very short talk before drinks. Everyone loves drinks. So here we go. So a little while ago, we hosted, Denise Cruz set up the OWASP London Summit. Actually came to us a little while late last year, and we were one of the few teams that donated actually to start this. And the idea was great. It was like, how about we have the unconference? So for 5 days, without any talks, speakers, and so on, it's just a bunch of geeks sitting down and working on some of the things that they love. So it was actually quite a cool idea.
Some nice villas as well, right?
Oh my God. So he came here several times to promote this, and had he explained what this venue was like, I'm sure there was a lot more people. I certainly would have stayed a lot more than what I did. I'm still a little bit salty about that. But anyway, so they set up this event, and we can show you a very nice video that Denise had on it. Yeah. For those hopeless romantics.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Yeah. So for those who are interested in what exactly was it and what did we do, we hosted a 5-day event with several different types of tracks, with a lot of different topics that people wanted to just talk about. So the event was great if you have want 5 days to work with your colleagues on something that you're not necessarily working at work, or meet like-minded people at one place to actually get something done, it was actually quite productive. So this is what we mean by villas. So you don't actually sit in a hotel room like in Las Vegas and so on. You have a villa. A villa with mine came with a sauna on the back of it, and there was a pool room and a PlayStation and a whole bunch of other stuff, and it was great. It also is part of this a spa as well, so there's that as well. Although we didn't get to much use it. Tennis courts. There's a lot more than that, and yeah, and barbecues at night, and some of the events were actually held in these houses. They weren't actually held in the events, but yeah, you would sit around and we would all talk about something. And we did something else that was a little bit different than other events. We actually hired technical writers, so that once we got a whole bunch of random techno bubble, there's a bunch of people that sat down and try to make sense of it. And one of those poor victims was me, and I'll explain to you in a second at the very end. So yeah, so you'd see here, we'd sit down in the villas afterwards. We would do some presentations and do a lot of interesting works. And then there's people also running around trying to get the information in there. And yes, lots of drinks, which came in handy as well. So yeah, and Bletchley Park was close by, so some of us also went there, slight detour, and then came back. And I like this picture because I'm sitting there with my endless glass of gin. And that's simply because I actually showed up on the last day, and Denise and Francois grabbed me and said, right, fresh blood. We need you to go around all the different tracks and actually try to work on the outcomes. And you can see here from the different stacks, the technical writers brought them together. And then we had this assembly system where we would go through GitHub, all the different tracks, all the different information, try to put it together, and then get the technical writers to actually make it more human readable. So without further ado, I can show you some of the things that I've had to go through and actually sift through. So here's a bunch of the outcomes. First of all, before I begin, I should tell you that there was a lot of positive feedback on it, and there was a lot of work. So you can see the number of commits just went through the roof as basically everybody was living in GitHub that week. That was, yeah, that was basically a GitHub repo for the outcomes for the event, and all the different tracks had different repositories for it, and everybody was just sitting on his laptop and committing, to the point where sometimes it was actually hard to do a commit because of all the pull requests. And Denise was actually making a joke, maybe you should have done a script to actually get in first. But yeah, I can see over 999 commits for that week. And here's a short list. And I was actually proud of this because I was one of the first, actually, I was the first to actually put in the outcome menus all the different tracks and folders. So here's a few of so we had like a CISO track, a SecOps track, education track, OpenSAM, the maturity model, Juice, the mobile testing project. So we'll run through them because also it's getting in the way of our drinks and pizza, and we don't want to do that as much. So here's, without further ado, the mobile testing guide. They actually worked on it, and they actually really diligently. So these guys were troopers. They made another release for it, and it was actually a good assembly model. Sam, so obviously one of the guys that was actually promoted at first was Sam, and actually he did some work on it. You can also see how we had like one board, and off the back of that actually resulted into updates, application security guides for CISO, so what you do at the CISO level, GitHub integration. So there was also some issues with GitHub and some features that we'd have liked. So we've actually built a letter to send to GitHub saying we love GitHub, we want to work with you, but there are some things that would have made it better. So the community would like to work with you on that. There's the same thing with GDPR. So a bunch of CISOs and actually AppSec engineers were going through GDPR and going, well, I want some technical clarification on this. And then they thought, well, if I don't know it, a lot of people might not know it, and we would probably want to know about it. So they actually wrote a letter that they'd eventually like to send to the Information Commissioner on, hey, we would like to help. We would also like to get clarification because these things are really important. And GDPR ultimately, they feel, would be actually a good thing. But this information would actually help smooth things over for the tech community. And we want to actually have working relationship with you guys, so that as new laws are coming and attack surfaces are changing, we also want to be involved, or at least provide you some feedback and get some technical guidance on what you want to achieve from a legal perspective. Threat modeling cheat sheet, the playbooks, lots of playbooks, and lots of people sifting through it for technical editing. So yeah, DOS playbook, incident response playbook, bug bounty playbook, one of my favorites. Yeah, media handling playbook, due diligence playbook. Yeah, and ransomware. Yeah, OWASP testing guide. There's been some updates there. Docker, and this is actually one of the most interesting ones, which is basically this wasn't actually an output or document or anything. This was, in fact, a circle of trust. So the idea of the collective defense cluster is a circle of trust of people that actually can be, that will show up in OWASP and say, we want this circle of trust of these organizations, these people, and we want to talk amongst ourselves to help solve something, or a support network. And I think Denise Cruz with one of the teams, they basically had an issue that were, there was a DDoS attack, and actually that collective actually worked to help that team recover from this incident. So even during that event, that something actually was achieved, which is good. And then there were numerous project updates as well. One thing that Denise thought of, and we both agree on and we would like, is that we don't necessarily have to wait for the next summit in April next year, which I'll be definitely booking a ticket to for the entire 5 days as opposed to just Thursday. But we can also host some events, well, one night every now and then like that, where instead of having an event where it's just a couple of technical talks, we have a few drinks, it's having a couple of roundtables, picking a couple of topics and working on them, and also getting some technical writers if need be to actually put it all together as well. So it's more of a social event, but also like if you have one evening that you want to work on something, you can also come in and meet your colleagues and try to get something done. So that's also one of the outputs and one of the things we're thinking of. That's it, and on to the next summit.
Okay, guys, and now it's 10-minute break for more pizza, more beer, and then after that we'll have Christian presenting his talk, and he's got some few books remaining he can sign for you, so it's going to be a very, very interesting one. So I invite you to stay for the second talk as well. If you guys manage to grab one of the books and want to have it signed, see me during the break. Okay, everyone, can you please start returning to your seats because we're going to continue soon.
You have the video ready as well.
Okay, so you have a clicker,
Yeah.
right? Do you want the microphone,
Yes,
wearable
I'm getting
microphone?
You told me so. Do you have?
I've got a slide to introduce you as well, but I can just do
Like this?
Okay, everyone. Please take your seats. We're ready to continue. Right. Okay, so our next speaker has just flown in from Switzerland, and which is absolutely amazing that he managed to be here on time. And yeah, he actually managed to email me before getting on the plane, which is absolutely amazing. So those of you who don't know Christian Fellini, he's been around for a very long time and OWASP active for many, many years. I think going back to at least 10 years or more. And yeah, as you rightly said, his background is actually not in security, but in humanities. So he is a specialist in medieval history and medieval castles. And he ended up actually in application security because he tried to get a job at an open-air museum. And after struggling with a website for a while, he figured out, oh no, I'm going to just go into website security now. And another important thing to know about Christian is not only the biggest guru on the mod security, as he's going to talk about now, but there's one other project that she usually doesn't mention, and I need to mention because we have something called OWASP cheat sheets. Okay, so which is quite a useful thing for developers. Look at the cheat sheet for a particular technology, and there is a virtual patching cheat sheet that Christian authored many years ago. So that is still around, which I checked. And obviously, those of you who are trying to virtually patch the application vulnerabilities using ModSecurity and OWASP core rule set can still find it out. Another cool thing that Christian runs is Swiss Cyberstorm. They have a very good conference, and those of you who want to go not too far away to Black Hat in America, but somewhere close and nice to Switzerland, there is a conference they can check out. Yeah, and of course, those of you who actually look at ModSecurity will know the first edition was authored by Ivan Ristich, and the second one was actually written by Christian. And as you may have spotted, there are some books already here that he brought with him, and I think you managed to get them signed. There will be a continued book launch party after the event at the pub, and so I think Christian will tell us about this a bit later. So there, without further ado, I got Dr. Christian Fellini and a talk on mod security. Right. It's all yours, Dr. Christian.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So mod security and the core rule set, the topic of my talk. Before I start, I'd like to tell you a little story. In January, I was flying to California. And when I boarded
the plane Donald Trump had just announced the Muslim ban. I was in the air and the demonstrations were starting. I landed in San Francisco and we would hear the demonstrators chanting outside. There were hundreds of them and the border control was completely overwhelmed. So they were understaffed, of course, and a huge queue was forming for entrance and clearance at the custom. And I've been in the air for 11 hours, but now it was European time, like 4 o'clock in the morning. And I really wanted to go to bed, and the queue took me 2 or 3 hours to get to the front. And as I approached the front, my mind wandered around. I assessed the security situation. And I had this funny idea that there was a single barrier barring my entrance to the United States. And they were understaffed, of course, and completely overwhelmed. So nobody was really paying attention. It was just one small barrier and sneak underneath and I would be in. And my mind started to blur. And then I thought, maybe that's not the smartest idea. So in the end, I made it to the front of the queue. And the guy let me in after a couple of questions. And then when I went around the corner, it occurred to me that I'd totally misconcepted the whole security setup, because there was a huge empty hall with a single door exit at the end and a person sitting there. And all of what this person was doing was checking a hand-signed mark on my immigration form. So they had a very simple second layer of security, which was very stupid, but highly effective against stupid attackers like me. So if I would have sneaked under that bar, they would immediately caught me. And it occurred to me, look, this is a stupid added layer of security. That's security in depth. It needn't be super smart, but it can be highly effective. I like to think of this as very slow here. Okay, as seatbelt. So we all use seatbelts when we drive a car. Everybody knows that a seatbelt is no silver bullet. People are dying in car accidents despite the seatbelt, but everybody is wearing them because we think, given the small hassle, it has a big security value. So you have your fairly strong vehicle and you drive securely, but as an additional security or safety device, you put on a seatbelt. It's no total solution, but it helps you survive an accident. And coming back to application security, ModSecurity and the core rule set is an additional layer of security. It's not meant to be a silver bullet. It's not meant to protect you 100% when you have an extremely broken application. But it adds a bit of security on top for relatively low hassle. What's my plan for tonight? I'm going to introduce you to WAFs a bit, so web application firewalls, ModSecurity, the core rule set. I'll show you a small demo how you can install it. It'll be very brief because installation is so simple. And then I'll introduce you to a few core concepts of the core rule set, rules, and then I'll show you how to go from here when you return to your day job. Yeah, I guess that's it. So web application firewalls. A web application firewall is a device or a software that sits on the edge of your network on a service, and it inspects the traffic coming into the server and going out from the server to the client. That's the basic concept. And it tries to understand the traffic a bit and to block malign traffic while letting vanilla or benign traffic pass. So it wants to make a cut between the attackers and the legitimate users. Unlike a network firewall, which is extremely simple, which is a network firewall does maybe a bit static traffic inspection, but usually just this port is open, this port is blocked. That's very simple to configure. But an application is highly complicated. So setting up a web application firewall is usually quite difficult to do. So it has a similar name to a network firewall, but it's much more complex. You can argue, of course, that wouldn't it be better to actually fix the code than to try to protect it with an additional measure? And I think, yeah, it would be a lot better if people would write secure code. But if the last 20 years of web security have taught us one thing, then it is that writing secure code is extremely hard, and fixing broken code code seems to be even harder still. And one measure against this, if you don't really trust yourself to write secure code, is adding more security in front of it, or behind, or around, or multiple layers. Do an onion setup for your security, because there will be holes, and all the security layers combined will help you protect you. Web application firewalls are recommended by the PCI DSS standard. That's probably why everybody hates, or a lot of people hate WAFs. PCI made it a highly commercial area. So a lot of commercial companies went into this field, developed a web application firewall. That is a very hard competition, a very fierce competition. There is a lot of hype. There's a lot of sales going on, and also a lot of fad and unkept promises. I would say web application firewall setups boil down in 3 categories. Oh, this has a lag. Okay, here we are. Good. So they boil down in 3 variants. The biggest group of them are naive installations, if you ask me. Naive installations is somebody told them, like PCI told them, you need a WAF. So they would buy a shiny box, hand them over to the system administrator, and then have a green check mark on the report. We have a WAF now. That's a naive installation. If it's super naive, it's not even plugged. Often it's plugged, but it's disabled. It's out of band. It's in monitoring mode. Nobody looks at the logs. It doesn't have any security at all. That's very typical. The smaller groups is the overwhelmed groups. These are system administrators. They actually try to run the WAF. So they have this shiny product and they enable it, and then they're overwhelmed. There is an avalanche of reports and false positives and real positives and lots of logs, and then they click through the GUI and there's so many check marks to do, and all very incomprehensible. It's really hard, and they try to make their way, but of course they get the box, but they don't get the resources to use it. So they need to somewhat squeeze in the time, and they try to do it. And if they're really adventurous, then after a couple of weeks, they sometimes try to enable it and actually put it in blocking mode. And then there are 2 scenarios what's going to happen. The simple scenario, the nice scenario is the customer is blocked. And the customer calls in and they likely figure out they have to disable this because the business is affected. The not so nice scenario is the boss calls in because he has been blocked and he's really upset. And most system administrators will stop using the WAF afterwards. They will not dare to put it in blocking mode anymore. And the final group is the functional WAF setup, and that is it's a bit of a rare species. I wouldn't say go as far as to say a functional WAF is as rare as a unicorn, but it's a mythical animal. So you have these big commercial products which do not really live up to the promise, or are much harder in production than what they're meant to be, or what you've been told, or they just don't have very sharp teeth. So they do a bit of security, but they're not really blocking a good attacker. Somehow it seems that most WAFs are commercial. So open source people somehow don't really like the concept. This boils down to there is a single open source web application firewall, and it's been around for like 15 years now, and this is ModSecurity. What is ModSecurity? It is no super modern artificial intelligence, machine learning, superward, cloud-enabled mastermind. It's much more like a Swiss watch. Maybe that's why I have affinity to ModSecurity. It is a mechanical swatch in the sense that it gives you very fine granular control on the request level, on parameters, headers, the URI, the response. You can look into the request in detail, and you can filter anything you want and block it or let it pass. but you need to do this all yourself, or you need rules to do this. It's not going to learn it by itself, like some of the commercial counterparts. You need to teach it, you need to configure it, or have a good configuration which does this for you. So ModSecurity is like the only real open source offering on the market. There are small single-purpose WAFs like Naxi on Nginx, but the functionality is much more limited. So we like to think of ModSecurity as an all-purpose WAF. It can do anything web for you. So that's ModSecurity. That is the engine. But then you need the rules. These are really two separated things. You have the web server, you build ModSecurity on top, and then comes the configuration in the forms of rules. And the rules is a different project. And this is where OWASP comes in. So the OWASP ModSecurity core rule set. It's a set of rules, and it's the most widespread set of rules that is being used with ModSecurity. It also has a very cool release poster. So this is CRS3, came out last winter, and this is the core part of my presentation. What is CRS3? What are the features? What are the core concepts? What can it do for you? CRS3 is a 10-year-old project which was launched by Ofer Shizaf from Israel. It was afterwards taken over by Ryan Burnett from the States, and then it died down a bit after 2010 or 12. And in 2015, it was revived by Cam Sanders and a guy named Walter Hopp from the Netherlands and me. So we're a new core team of three guys, and we recruited 4 or 5 additional developers in the meantime. We brought out CRS3 last winter, so the first major release in 4 or 5 years. And this is really a relaunch or a big rewrite of the whole rule set. So the project is back to life. It's alive and kicking. We're developing new rules. We're fixing holes, and we're venturing into new directions with the rule set. Now would be demo time, and the last time when I gave this presentation, they didn't like my notebook. I thought London was nicer with me, but it didn't like my notebook either. So this time I'm prepared, and we're going to run, I say play. We're going to run a video which helps me comment it. So we're going to install the ModSecurity core rule set. You can download it from the OWASP website. Or the OWASP website, see where to get it. So this is the OWASP page of the project. Again, the poster, and there are a couple of tutorials included. Actually, these are the official tutorials which I wrote. Here, it gives it URL. We paste it into the shell. We're downloading it. We're untarring the latest version. We enter the folder, and then we have a setup conf example, which we simply copy, and we don't even touch it. And then we start a new Apache. I'm working with Apache a lot, so I have a script to do this. This starts me a new Apache configuration. And in here, we simply include this setup file. And then on a second line, we include the rules. So the setup is the basic configuration, and the rules, obviously, the rule files. I save this. Then I launch the Apache web server. Go to the browser. Now running on localhost. And that's the basic Apache. It just tells you that it's here. And now we're adding an attacking query string. This looks attacking. I don't have the vulnerability, so we cannot exploit this. But it looks like exec bin bash, so that might be a common injection attack. And ModSecurity is blocking it immediately. So this was the whole installation to give you the whole core rule set. Can be as simple as that nowadays. This is the default installation. Everything which comes afterwards is adding more security or give you more granular control. And now we look at the error log of this request. That's very hard to read. We pipe it through an alias, which extracts the individual alerts. And what was detected here is a remote command execution, Unix shellcode found. So the bin bash was Unix shellcode found. And this is actually this alert here. He detected a bin bash on the argument exec. And that's more or less it. So this is the basic. Let you go back. Thank you, Sam. This has been the basic installation. And you could, bin bash as an exec variable is fairly simple. Would this really work? So does this really bring you any form of protection? You need to look at this with the help of some tools, because I could tell you, yeah, this helps, but does it really help in real life? I'm doing, or did a bit of research with Damiano Esposito from the University of Applied Sciences in Zurich. And what we did is we would use Burp to attack WAFSEP. WAFSEP is a vulnerable application, like the Choose Shop, which has been mentioned. WAFSEP is a web application vulnerability scanner evaluation project. So that is an application which exposes a lot of vulnerabilities and is meant to gauge the effectiveness of Burp or SAP or any other sort of attack scanner. It is meant to tell you how many of the vulnerabilities is Burp actually discovering. So, and each bar here is based on 4.5 million requests. Here is the no protection bar. So we installed this vulnerable application and then attacked it with Burp. Damiano Esposito, who done this with me, he made his master on vulnerability scanners. So he's like the Burp scanner mastermind. He takes the best, all the hardest or most advanced features out of Burp, assembled them in a pack of 4.5 million requests, and we attacked this application. And Burp reported to us that it thinks that close to 1,100 of its requests actually hit a vulnerability without any protection in between. And the default installation of ModSecurity with CRF 3, this has been the installation which you have seen. This is a vanilla installation we've just done in the video. Brought this down to, what is the number? 185. So like 80% of the vulnerabilities are gone or hidden now. They're no longer exposed with this simple default installation. So that's the effectiveness. What does this really mean in the categories? The default install would not work on the open redirects we was talking about. Remote file inclusion doesn't really help. Local file inclusion, extremely effective. Cross-site scripting, quite effective. SQL injection, really, really effective. And that's only the default install. That's not the advanced high secure setup. So when we did this, like in May, we had the first results. I was really feeling like, wow, we kind of solved the SQL injection problem, didn't we? And then unfortunately, we were challenged by an American guy, Ivan Novikov, and I set up a bet with him that I would offer a cake if he managed to pass an SQL injection, and he did, and I lost my cake. What the guy did, he was able to develop an SQL injection in 7 characters without any white space. and he defeated us. It was embarrassing, but and it looks so elegant, and I think he must be really smart. And what happened is, and that is a general WAF problem. So to ModSecurity, the core rule set, this looked really innocent. It didn't even have white space. How can you do an injection without white space? How would you tell the arguments apart? But he used something, and that's the basic problem, and we call this impedance mismatch. So what ModSecurity thinks is a white space is not necessarily what MySQL thinks is a white space. So we thought this was benign, and the backend would execute it. And that's the basic problem, which brings us back to this is only an additional layer of security. This is not a silver bullet. And even if I have wet dreams about fighting SQL injections, 100%, this could be a false sense of security. It's only helping you so and so far, and you still need other means of security. But by default, it defeats burp. And that's already something, isn't it? Good. Burp again. So what are we actually doing in these core rule sets? These are the rule files that we included. When we did include asterisk.conf, these were the files we were including. The files have numbers. This corresponds loosely to rule IDs. ModSecurity rules always have an ID. And now you know about which ID should be in which file. The file names are speaking. So we have method enforcement. We have scanner detection rules. We have protocol enforcement. That's really important because most web servers they're really like hippies. Or let's say they're quite liberal when it comes to enforcing HTTP standards. And ModSecurity is or the core rules that are much more stricter. So if you send an HTTP request which is not standard compliant, like you miss out the user agent, this is illegal. ModSecurity or core rule set will complain. This is not standard compliant. A browser will always send it. A user agent. And if you're not sending a user agent, then likely not a browser, and it's very likely we don't want to see you on this server. So that's what we're doing. We're much more strict than a standard web server. Protocol attacks, and then of course the SQL injection rules, the cross-site scripting rules, remote command execution, remote file inclusion, local file inclusions, PHP attacks, you name them. So that's a set of over 100 rules split over all these files. And the request I used to do in the demo triggered 3 separate alerts. One was in here, remote command execution. And then one was in this file. That's the blocking evaluation. So the rule which triggered didn't block immediately. That's a core concept in here. It would just write a message, and then we do an evaluation at the end, which gives us a bit more leverage on what to exactly do and how we want to behave. We're not blocking immediately, but we make an educated decision at the end what we want to do. That's a core concept. And then there has been a third alert, but that was only for statistics. So the biggest number of rules are, of course, request-based, but we also have response rules. We're a bit behind here in the sense that we have data leakages and error messages that we want to detect, and this is a bit outdated. So one of the findings of the burp research I did with my colleague was there were error messages which we didn't detect in the response. And all combined, actually, we issued 13 bug reports to our own project. So there were 13 things which we think the core rule set should have caught, and it didn't. And quite a few of them have been error messages which were simply updated and we didn't notice. So we need to work on that. And yeah, we're coming now to the second demo. And given the computer doesn't like my notebook, we need to do this by hand. I need your help to do this. And first, we need an attacker. And do we have somebody with a hoodie? Attackers are always wearing hoodies. Who has a hoodie? Yeah, yeah. You have a hoodie with. Hey, he has his hoodie hidden. Brilliant. Hi.
I'm not regretting this at all.
What's your name? You're Radu.
My name is Radu.
Nice to meet you. You're very good. Please put this on and put the hoodie up. That's very important for the demo. And then we need 5 additional people. You're going to be the defenders. You don't need a hoodie. Who wants to come up? Sam, you already know the deal. Who else wants to come? Sharif? Very good. Thank you. And we need number 5. Come on, volunteers. Michelle? Okay. Very good. We take the tallest guys at the end. You're tall. Step over. Sam, come here. Sharif, Michelle. Okay. Could you, you need a bit of approach. Go to the end. Give them a bit of room. Very good. And could you line up here, please, next to each other? Very good. Okay, and you go sideways. You stand here, and would you come to the front? Like this. Okay. What we're having here now, I'm lacking one of these. So these 3 nice people are our rules. Sam is the SQL injection rules. Sharif is going to be, he's going to check for missing headers. Sam has 5 points to give. Missing headers is less severe. Sharif gets only 2 points to give. And Michelle is going to look for cross-site scripting. So they represent a selection of the 150 or 180 rules that we have in the rule set. And then the final rules, which makes the blocking decision, is represented by these 2 nice gentlemen. Could you stand apart a bit and come a wee bit to the front, exactly, because you guys are actually defending the fridge. So the fridge, these are our sets we want to protect with the core rule set. I think that's a nice setup. And our attacker Radu wants beer, yeah. But he didn't pay. So the default installation would now be fairly low. That's the default installation, what we did. But if you do a real setup, and you want to be really sure that you don't have legitimate customers blocked, you usually start, and I advocate this, you start with a very high limit. Oops, sorry, you go really high. And by going really high and trying this out, you are already in a blocking mode, but you're quite sure that nobody will be blocked. And this is a very important concept, which I advocate in my courses. You want to start in blocking, but without actually blocking anybody. Because if you start in monitoring mode and you tune everything, you will never dare to put your lever into blocking. But when you start in blocking mode with a very easy limit, then lowering the limit a bit is a very small step. And we try this out now. So Radu is approaching the fridge. He's a HTTP request. Sam is now looking at the request and decides if Radu looks like an SQL injection or not. You think he is? Then put the tag on his back. Okay, good. Then you approach Sharif, go to the next rule, and he thinks he's even missing a header. That's a stupid attacker. Radu, you need to improve.
I'm sorry.
And Michelle, does he, on top of it, look like cross-site scripting? You think so? So he approaches the limit. Now, keep it really up, and he passes underneath. Despite the 17 points he has, he passes underneath. But he has alerted 3 rules. So he has triggered 3 rules. And we're now going to tune it a bit and see, oh, look, here is a real attacker, and the legitimate user are all passing. In the next iteration, sorry, you can go to the start again. In the next iteration, as we have grown in confidence, we're now lowering the bar. Let's say we go down to the default installation. and Radu does his attack again, probably the same attack because it works the last time. And he's getting the same tags again. And this time, he is likely blocked. and that is the integration of the Coral set. We're lowering the bar, and what you've seen in action is a scoring mechanism. So all the rules executing are adding scores, and at the end, the 949 rule is evaluating the score and deciding, do we let him pass or not? And the threshold can be defined by yourself. By default, it's just fairly low on a 5, but you can put it anywhere you want to. And what I do in my ModSecurity courses is showing in detail how you work through these iterations and how you can make an educated decision where the good limit should be at a given moment, so you can make sure that no legitimate customer is ever blocked. And that's what you ultimately want. You want to be really sure what's going to happen when you lower the bar. Thank you, guys. Thanks. Good. Yeah, here we are. So I should have shown you this. I really like the stormtroopers here. So this was the limbo dancing demo. Burp again. Next basic concept. We had the scoring, and now we do paranoia levels. The basic installation gave you 150 rules. And what we actually did, we installed the core rule set in paranoia level 1. So what is a paranoia level? We divided the rules into fairly sane rules, the default installation, and then in higher paranoia levels, you're getting more rules. And these rules are a bit more paranoid. They're a bit more crazy. With craziness and paranoia comes misjudgments and false decisions. This results in false positives. What is a false positive? A guarding dog biting the mailman is a false positive. A customer blocked by ModSecurity is a false positive. You don't want to have this. You want to make sure the customers are not affected. And ultimately, your boss is never blocked when he tests the site. So that's what you really want to make sure. In the level 1, we really, really paid attention to have none or as little as possible false positives. When you enable this, what we have done in the first demo is there shouldn't be any false positive. If you encounter a false positive in the default installation, please issue a bug report. We want to know this. We want to fix this. A default installation shouldn't raise any false positives. It shouldn't block you at all. In paranoia level 2, you have to encounter them now and then. Paranoia level 3, there will be more of them, quite a few actually. And paranoia level 4, it's going to be a lot of false positives. And all the false positives need to be handled by you. So this starts easy and gets harder and harder the higher the paranoia level. Yes? Is there any real difference between paranoia level 2 and 3? Yes, I'm coming back to this because you see the issue here. Yeah. So we like to think of these paranoia levels as levels of security. The default installation is a minimal baseline every web application should have, and that's what our idea is. It's CRS for everyone, and it should come with your hosting plan or your basic setup, just like nowadays HTTPS or Let's Encrypt certificates, they're included. And we think the CRS3 should be included in a default paranoia level 1. In 2, you realize that you have real assets and you want a bit more rules, a bit better protection. And here you have to look a bit more careful and you'll encounter a few false positives which you need to handle. In paranoia level 3, you actually have true assets and you need real security, even if so far there's no much difference here. And in paranoia level 4, it's just the highest level. I'm working on an e-voting project in Switzerland, and we're running a paranoia level 4. And it's just very hard. But we think it's good added value for the money. So when we looked at the Burp research, he did over 1,000, or identified over 1,000 vulnerable requests, or requests triggering accessing a vulnerability, and only 5 of them made it through paranoia level 4. So what are these 5? These are mostly out-of-band communication. So the application would issue a parameter, and the vulnerable application would take the parameter and do a DNS lookup. So that's out of band, and Burp would then encounter, oh, look, it has done the DNS lookup. It is out of band communication. And for us, with the core rule set, it's extremely hard to do, because you would need to identify a parameter as a potential host name, which can be used in DNS lookup. So it's going to be extremely hard to protect from that. And maybe that's beyond reason to expect core rule set to protect from that. So we have what we think are 4 security levels in the core rule set, and the role of the security officers amongst you or in your organization would be to take the threat model of your services and map them to a security level. So if it's just the feedback form, it's probably very low. But if you're an online bank, then you should likely be in this region with your services. It really depends on your threat model and the value of your assets and the resources that you can spend. And mind you, if you're raising the paranoia level, you need more and more resources to integrate the service. That's obvious. So if you as security officers assign a higher security level, a paranoia level to a service, you need to make sure that people actually get the resources to handle the false positives, to set this up accordingly. So this paranoia level, what does this mean in practice? This is what I explained. Let's say basic security, elevated security, online banking level, and the nuclear power plant level security. Somebody working in nuclear power plant? Okay, we've been lucky. I have a guy, a friend of mine who actually he's a cousin of mine. We're actually related nowadays. So he works in nuclear power plant and said the only reason we don't have internet connection in the central steering unit is the time we built this, it was not invented. But they're fixing this problem now. They're bringing in the internet into the central steering unit. Makes me a bit afraid. So these are paranoia levels. Let's look at the protocol enforcement rules. That's the biggest group of rules we have. And the default, we do 31 rules. Elevated, additional 7. Paranoia level 3, only 1 additional rule. That's the issue here. So this level has very few rules, fewer than we have in mind. This is a development area now. We want more rules to have in here. And then paranoia level 4, we have a couple of rules, and that's actually good enough because they're extremely basic and extremely aggressive. They look at special characters. This can be seen on the next slide. Within this paranoia levels is the concept of stricter siblings. We'll look at byte range enforcement. So that's within the protocol rules. At paranoia level 1, we have a rule 920.270, which allows full ASCII range without the null character. So that's almost everything is okay in the default installation. At the level 2, we say you can have the visible range plus the tab and the new line. So this is now a bit more restricted. All the steering characters are now off. Paranoia level 3, we go to the visible lower ASCII range. So that's up to 127 without the % sign because it's used for encoding. And then in paranoia level 4, it's just a whitelist of a few characters, which are okay by now. The cool thing about the SQL injection 7 characters was he was able to do this with these characters. And that was really cool. I didn't expect that. So So that's the concept. If you look at the rule IDs, you see that they are related. So when you look at an alert and you see the rule ID, you already know a bit of the family this is coming from when you work with these rules. So they're somehow grouped, and we do this a lot in the core rules. We have strict siblings, so like families working together, and there is a basic rule, and then it has a few tough relatives which get stricter and stricter and stricter. And what will actually happen here is cumulation. If you do a null character, it will trigger this one, this one, this one, and this one. So in paranoia level 4, you could say the null character would trigger 4 rules, giving him 20 scores. He's immediately across the top the roof. In paranoia level 4, that's a typical effect. The scores get very high very quickly. I'm through here. And this. So this is this was the scoring. We have 150 rules in the basic installation, then like 30 more in the paranoia level 2, 10 or 50 more in paranoia level 3, and a couple of them in paranoia level 4. We can do scoring, we can do paranoia level. So this is our leverage, how to steer the things. These are basic concepts. But if you have an existing service and think about ModSecurity, most people are afraid. Or you ask your friend and he will tell you, look, I've set up ModSecurity and it killed my site. Either performance or because it would block legitimate traffic. And we think this is a real problem for established sites. Bringing in ModSecurity it's an adventure and it could be risky. I've now written the book and I did extensive research on performance, and ModSecurity will easily eat like 5 or 10% of your throughput, just going into regular expressions thanks to ModSecurity. So we help you with the sampling mode. What is the sampling mode? Sampling mode is meant to get your feet wet a bit with ModSecurity and core rule set. So you enable ModSecurity, you enable the core rules, but only on n% of the requests. And if you have a lot of traffic, say 1 million hits per day, if that is a lot, Just Need has probably more. And you say, I'm only looking at 1% of the requests, then you can be quite sure the server will not break down under the load because it's just 1% of the requests. 99% of the requests will bypass the rule set. So nothing really bad can happen. And even if it blocks your requests, only 1% of them will be blocked. So this is really easy. Get your feet wet and make sure you're not overwhelmed with all the false positives, with all the logs, performance loss. That's a good way to ease into it. And then as you grow in confidence, you raise the percentage. And at a given moment, you're quite confident whatever comes now must be very rare. Because if it would be frequent or often or a huge problem, you would have encountered it by now. And again, as when we lower the anomaly limit, this is an iterative process. You enable it a bit, you let it run for a few hours, few days, few weeks, you return, look at the logs, weed out the false positives, and then you make the next educated step. This is no wild, just plug it in and see what happens, and if it explodes, it's bad, and if it doesn't, then it's probably fine. You do one step at a time, and whatever you do, at every change you're issuing, you know exactly what's going to happen. And there will be very little surprises. Let's return to the false positives. There is another cheat sheet, talked about this. There is a ModSecurity rule exclusion cheat sheet. So the problem with false positive is that rules are triggers when they shouldn't. And what you need to do is you need to exclude this rule in this given situation. I'm advocating typically 4 types of ways to achieve this. This is all documented in tutorials. And you can also download the cheat sheet from my company website, netneo.com. So 4 ways. One way is simply to remove the ID, the rule by ID. it will be gone. The complete rule is gone. But of course, there's probably more than what you want. If you think of the core rules as a wall made of bricks, you've just taken a big piece of it away. And what you usually want is, you want the rule only disabled for an individual parameter, perhaps. The search field, typically, free text entry field. And there you would remove the parameter, the rule for a given parameter. And then you can also combine this with a given path. So you would only remove the rule on a given path. You do this at runtime, but these are details. I don't want to dive into that. Or you combine the two techniques. You remove the rule for a given path for a given parameters. So these are the four variants which I advocate. And the job when running the core rules in a higher paranoia level, weeding out false positives, is finding a solution for these false positives. Doing this by hand is fairly cumbersome. That's why I developed a methodology how to do this and a set of scripts which help you pull this off. So what the scripts are doing, they write the exclusions for you. You can see here already that it's fairly cumbersome to write this because ModSecurity rule writing is annoying and fairly tricky, and the scripts do the writing for you. So they propose to you so-called rule exclusions, which you then copy into your configuration, which helps you a big deal. And the course I'm running is giving you a go with these scripts, helping you perform this and get the hang of it. And finally, before we come to the end, is set of rule exclusions. So we know there are a couple of crazy applications around. As it happens, WordPress and especially Drupal, they do crazy things. So things that look like a vulnerability, but they're actually standard behavior of Drupal. What Drupal would do is it has random cookie names with random values. And it can happen, because they're random, that they resemble attack patterns. And given that the cookie name is also random, it's fairly hard to detect or disable a rule. So we know when we run Drupal, we need to disable, especially at paranoia level 2, we need to disable a set of rules which will break Drupal. That's a given. So we developed a set of rule exclusions for specific applications. We started with Drupal core and the WordPress default install. And in the CRS setup conf, which I copied in the installation demo, inside this file, you can enable these exclusions. And then with this, you tell your web server or you tell ModSecurity, look, I'm running Drupal and don't get on my nerve with the crazy shit. And we have more of this in the queue. Typo 3, have to admit this died down a bit. My Typo 3 partner, I think he gave up on this project. He got a new job. And I'm developing a PVIC. PVIC is a Google Analytics open source alternative. Default install rule set. And we need more people help us develop these rule sets, because we're not experts in Joomla or any other special application, off-the-shelf application where people might want to run ModSecurity with. So this is an area where we really welcome contributions. And if you want to help develop such a set, we're really open to work with you, because we know how to handle false positives, but we don't know your application. And together we can develop a set which should ease the pain on people running the core rules with said applications. Good. So let me summarize. The ModSecurity core rule set is the first line of defense against web attacks. It's a generic set of blacklisting rules for WAFs. So it knows a bit about attacks. It tries to identify them and tries to block them. It prevents 80% of web attacks with minimal false positives. I think we can really make this claim. And it gives you very granular control on individual parameters, which helps you tailor the configuration to your specific service and give this a maximum protection. With the help of the paranoia levels, you can really push the security level that ModSecurity can bring you to a very high level. Yeah, that's it. This was me.
Thanks.
Hold on for a second. So I'm Christian
Contact.
Follini. I just broke the 500 Twitter followers today. Can go to 550. I'll be very happy. Most of what I've explained today can be found on my company website. Namely, over 10 Apache ModSecurity tutorials are to be found there. You can find this also via the OWASP site. And I'm running a ModSecurity course in London in October. So if I caught your interest with this presentation, we have a couple of seats available, and I'd be very happy to see you in my course. It's a 2-day course where we go from very or almost zero level of knowledge, from zero to hero in 2 days. After 2 days, you'll be able to run paranoia level 4 and handle the false positives, because exercises with false positives is really what is difficult about running this. And it would be great to see you in the pub afterwards. I'd like to party about the book a bit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to put up the picture of the pub on the screen while Sharif takes the questions. I think we have time for 2 questions only, and then we'll go to the pub.
Okay. Well, first.
Hi, thank you very much, Christian. It reminds me of OWASP App Sensor, but I guess the difference, if I've understood this right, is it kind of wraps around the web application server rather than inside the application code. Is that correct? Right.
Yeah,
okay.
We're a bit further off from the application. So a reverse proxy, it's usually running on the reverse proxy. It is in front of the application on a separate server. And as I tried to explain, we don't really understand the application. So we try to guess with regular expression what is going on here, which leads to problems, things we cannot detect because the application interprets the request differently from what we assume. So we're a bit further off than the other OWASP project.
So would having ModSecurity and OWASP App Sensor at the same place, well, the same system, be an overkill of the same rule set, or are the rules significantly different?
It could be overkill. It really depends. I haven't run the two together, so I can really tell you. I think it has to be part of your threat model or your software development lifecycle, where you define exactly what project or software should protect from what attack or attack vector.
Thank you very much.
That's fun. Before I hand over the second question, I have a feature request. Can you create a Jenkins plugin so I can run my regression pack against, for at least the critical path for my application, like the booking, sign in, and so on. And the Jenkins plugin eventually creates the pack that will avoids false positives, basically finds what triggers and tells you, and here's a rule pack that will not trigger against that specific thing.
I wrote this down. There are a couple of blog posts online done by TrustWave where they've pulled similar things off. So where they developed rules which generate rules, it's a bit of in the direction of machine learning. And I think that would be a base to build upon. But I think it was never, it was more of a proof of concept.
Yeah, this thing is really, really stupid. Run this traffic. If the rule has a flag to block it, suppress it.
Yeah.
One last question.
Okay, so we're running like hundreds of web server with web applications in our data centers, and now to be able to set up ModSecurity and all the servers will probably be difficult to scale. So I thought, okay, if we want to do it in the parameter, just in front of all of the applications, but then all the web applications are with DTOS certificates, with something like public key pinning enabled, and so all traffic is going through HTTPS. So what is the best way, and in a scalable way, to have ModSecurity inspect that traffic if it's sitting in the parameter?
Okay, I have customers who terminate the SSL on the load balancer. And then the next box is a reverse proxy with ModSecurity on top. But I generally advocate to terminate SSL on the reverse proxy together with ModSecurity, because the traffic will be the freshest for ModSecurity. So we're closest to the SSL, and we could even think of setups where the SSL information about the client helps ModSecurity to make a better decision. So I would generally say, try to install ModSecurity where you terminate the encryption in front of your application.
And that's was hundreds of certificate for each application on the server where ModSecurity is sitting. Is that something that's a typical setup?
Can be a typical setup. It depends. I have my most important customer. I work as a contractor or a security consultant. They have 500 Apache instances, over 110 different applications. And the instances are always for one or a couple of closely related applications, a single Apache instance, or like 2 of them with a certificate for this application. And then on the same server, a separate Apache daemon for the next application. I think that is a setup which is easy to operate because they're still fairly separated. And then you need your DevOps tools to deploy this and handle this, obviously.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, thank you very much, Christian. And right, I know you have more questions. I certainly have more questions. You can ask them all in the pub in a few minutes' time. First of all, I'd like to say a big thank you to our speakers, to Christian and to Lewis. Yeah, thank you very much, guys. A huge thank you to our hosts, to Just Eat and Kevin Fielder, the CISO, for this amazing venue. Reminder, all slides, all presentations will be published on OWASP.org. The videos will also be uploaded onto YouTube, where you can watch them at a later date. And here is the pub we're all going to go to now. The Viaduct Tavern. There's a picture. It's across the road if you head back towards St. Paul's. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in September.